The first Metroid game covered Samus' Zero mission. It showed us her first introduction to the parasitic Metroids, explored the mysterious and important planet Zebes, and placed her as the greatest enemy and fear of the space pirates. Its sequel, Metroid 2: Return of Samus, chose to focus on one of these elements and expand on it: the Metroids. This game follows Samus as she explores planet SR-388, the Metroid homeworld, bent on annihilating their entire species from the universe. Similar to the original game, the story was heavily expanded on in a remake, 2017's Metroid: Samus Returns, released for the Nintendo 3DS. Arguably, it's even more drastically expanded than Zero Mission was, including new connections to every later Metroid game, new perspectives on the events of the game itself, and giving answers to questions the series has had since the very first game in 1986. As with the previous Metroid video, Samus Returns will be the version we discuss today, as not only does it tie up many loose ends and plot holes in the canon, but like Zero Mission, is directly affirmed as the canon version of the game by Metroid Dread, with its exclusive editions playing a major role in the story of that game. Throughout the wars between the Space Pirates and the Galactic Federation, Metroids have been an ever-present threat. Time and again, the pirates have cloned the Metroids, mutated them into even deadlier forms, and attempted to harness them as bioweapons to conquer the galaxy. Now, with the space pirate threat nearly eradicated, the Federation has turned its gaze to planet SR-388, the original home of the Metroids, to determine if there were still Metroids surviving on the planet. Note that, even in 1991, this is not the first time we'd heard of the planet. As far back as the original NES game, planet SR-388 has always been a part of the lore. In the Metroid 1 manual, it's described as the long-dead and abandoned planet where the Federation first discovered the Metroids. The Federation sent an elite Special Forces unit of the Federation Police to the planet to find and kill any Metroids, which is barely able to transmit any data before being mysteriously slaughtered on the planet's surface. But what data did get sent back was clear. Metroids remained on SR-388. Immediately and unanimously, the Federation Council came to the decision to hire bounty hunter Samus Aran, the one person who showed to be consistently capable of dealing with Metroid threats, and contracted her for a simple mission: exterminate all the Metroids that remained alive in the universe, and completely wipe any trace of them from existence, once and for all. Accepting this contract, Samus makes planetfall on SR-388, ready to slay the last Metroids in the universe. There's one other very important thing to talk about in regards to SR-388. The planet is very good at condensing Aeon, a sort of life energy. Samus uses it throughout the game in order to use different abilities, but it also has other purposes that we'll explore later. But for now, just keep in mind that this planet is the only known place in the universe where the environment condenses this energy. It's so much that creatures on the planet drop visible amounts when harmed or killed. This close tie to Aeon made SR-388 into a vibrant ecosystem teeming with life, one with a very fragile balance, and deadly consequences for disturbing it. Early in her exploration of SR-388, Samus finds the Scan Pulse, the first of 4 Aeon artifacts left behind by the Chozo. These items show the sheer amount of research into the energy the Chozo had completed, and their near mastery over it. These suit upgrades allow Samus herself to collect Aeon and use it to magnify her abilities, whether it be to increase her already formidable defenses and firepower, or even speed up her perception of time itself. Soon after, Samus runs across a rogue Metroid, which she immediately goes after. To her surprise though, she watches as the Metroid changes. Before her eyes, it goes from its more familiar form to a evolved creature with a protective shell and energy projectiles. This is her first time seeing the natural life cycle of the Metroid species, which we will be seeing more of as we progress further through the game. Starting with the familiar Metroids that we now recognize as being mere infants in the life cycle. Upon its defeat, Samus' suit collects the last remaining pieces of the deceased creature's DNA. Traveling further, she soon finds a mysterious stone device left behind by the Chozo who once lived on the planet, which shows the effigy of a Metroid, and is surrounded by a corrosive purple liquid so inhospitable to life that it scars the very crust of the planet. This stuff is so powerful that even the gravity suit, which can shield against most hazardous fluids in the series, cannot withstand it, not even when combined with her new Aeon abilities. Upon presenting the Metroid's DNA to the device takes in and destroys the DNA before draining the purple liquid away, allowing Samus to travel deeper into the caves of SR388. In the next layer down, not only does Samus find more of these mysterious evolved Metroids, but also a weapon more conducive to their demise, the Ice Beam. In past Metroid games, the Ice Beam has normally been the only way of harming these parasitic creatures, and here it's no different. With her arsenal now fortified with this Sub-Zero weapon, Samus serves as an even deadlier dispatcher of the Metroid species. As she travels deeper into the planet, Samus sees more of the same. More purple fluid, more stone devices, and each time, upon slaying the Metroids in each level and again presenting their DNA to be destroyed at the stone devices, she's granted access to the deeper caves. It's also made clear over the course of the game that these caves are actually a set of ancient Chozo ruins, slowly becoming more developed the deeper she goes, revealing that the Chozo structures here were the remnants of an entire civilization nestled into the bowels of SR388. As she moves along, she also finds more mature Metroids, with each new evolution being more powerful and terrifying than the last. And yet, not all of them seem to want to fight her. Some of the Metroids cower at the sight of her, and others even try to flee from the battle with Samus, requiring her to hunt them down to secure the kill. Deep into the planet, she discovers and accidentally reactivates the Diggernauts, a powerful mining robot left behind by the Chozo. After several encounters with it, the robot scans and seemingly recognizes her suit before beginning to attack her, defending what turns out to be the entrance to a mysterious, clearly Chozo laboratory filled with extremely detailed information on every aspect of the Metroids, and many mysterious mechanical green pods resembling Metroid eggs. Fighting her way into the deepest depths of this lab, Samus discovers that the Metroids have made the bowels of the lab their ultimate nest, the very heart of their species. Samus also discovers tunnels, clearly not made by the Chozo, leading back up towards the surface. Following these tunnels, she suddenly encounters many recently birthed Metroids, and fighting through them all, eventually comes across a massive, terrifying beast that filled an entire cavern. The Queen Metroid, the mother of all Metroids, and the most powerful and evolved form of the species. Furious that Samus had annihilated all of her children and was now threatening the Queen herself, the two entered a long, harrowing showdown, one that pushed Samus to the very limits and forced her to use every ability in her arsenal. When even her Ice Beam and missiles didn't do the job, Samus resorts to her most powerful weapon, the destructive Power Bomb. Forcing the Queen's head to the ground with the grapple beam, she makes her way into the monster's throat and detonates multiple power bombs inside the Queen's stomach, eventually dealing so much damage that the Queen is atomized completely, without a shred of matter remaining. Even this, the most powerful of the Metroids, meets her end at the hands of Samus Aran. Continuing past the Queen's cavern, to her surprise, Samus finds an egg. A Metroid egg, the last of its kind. And just as she begins to approach it, it hatches, revealing a small, infant Metroid. Samus's immediate reaction was to fight the baby head-on, but she hesitates. The baby Metroid doesn't seem to be aggressive at all, and as she stands there, the infant imprints upon her, accepting Samus as her mother. And in that moment of hesitation, Samus silently realizes the horror of what she's done. In slaughtering the Metroids of SR388, she has committed a genocide. Yes, she'd always fought Metroids that had been dangerous and threatening, but the few actions that this baby had taken in the world were showing her that maybe not all Metroids are like that. Maybe there's more to them than just pure malice. In a way, the baby even reminds Samus of herself as a small child. When she was young, the colony on which Samus had lived with her parents had been attacked by space pirates led by Ridley, and the entire populace had been slaughtered save Samus herself, who was then taken in by a Zabesian Chozo that came to investigate the aftermath. In accepting this small, innocent child whose entire race had just been massacred, Samus feels a deep remorse for her actions. Then and there, Samus defied the orders of her contract with the Federation by sparing the last Metroid and swore to protect her. Together, the two explore the rest of SR388, forming a bond akin to that of a mother and child, before Samus decides that they can leave the planet safely, and they return to Samus's gunship to take off. But unfortunately for the pair, this isn't the end of the story. Just as they reach the ship, a furious figure tears through the atmosphere and immediately hones in on the hunter and the baby. The figure quickly revealed to be none other than the cunning god of death, Ridley himself. Wearing what remained of his cybernetic enhancements for the Metroid Prime games, which we will come back to in a later video. He's also fully healed from the devastating injuries he sustained during Zero Mission, a process that took 2 years bound to mechanical implants to complete. He came back to SR388 to collect another Metroid sample for the Space Pirates to clone, much like they had in Zero Mission. But now, there's only one Metroid left, and with the state the few remaining Space Pirates are in, he can't leave the planet without it. Samus, now feeling surprisingly protective over the small creature, and not wanting the Space Pirates to have access to yet another Metroid, leaps into action, fighting off her greatest foe with the rage and ferocity of a mother bear. The two mortal foes viciously tear into each other, leading to one of the most brutal, visceral fights in the entire series. More so than any fight leading up to this, it is absolutely personal between these two, and given the long history between them, Ridley's intentions with the baby Metroid, and not least of all the many times Samus has tried and failed to kill Ridley in previous games, it only makes sense. Eventually, Samus is able to free the baby from Ridley's grasp. In hopes of protecting her mother, the baby attacks Ridley, draining energy out of him. But instead of consuming that energy for herself, as all other Metroids we've seen have done, the baby instead shows selflessness, transferring that energy to the injured Samus. At the end of the brutal battle, Samus sends Ridley crashing to the wasteland of SR388's surface, and then she and the baby escape the planet. Not that Ridley was killed, mind you. Of course he wasn't. He survived thus far, why would this change anything? As shown in the post-credits cutscene, Ridley survived. Stripping off the remaining broken cybernetics, he takes off again to follow his targets, fully organic once again. After leaving SR388, Samus lingers in orbit, contemplating deeply. Samus had strong suspicions about the origins of the Metroids, as well as questions about their potential after what had just transpired. After deep thought, Samus takes the baby to a research station on the space colony Ceres to reach this potential, and to confirm her suspicions. She had come to realize that they weren't inherently evil or violent. In her mind, maybe there was hope for them yet, even if only one remained. However, Samus and the baby set off to embrace a destiny that was far more tragic. Back in the end credits scene, a local creature known as a Hornode nibbles at Ridley's discarded armor, when it sees a strange creature. A floating organism that looks like a gelatinous yellow mass. Curiously, the Hornode approaches it before being attacked. When the Hornode finally returns, it looks different. Warped into a grotesque red form that looks even more lethal than before. It is here where we fade out on the events of Samus Returns. An unspeakable horror has been unleashed, and thanks to Samus's actions in this game, the entire universe faces near certain doom. We'll discuss the identity and importance of this yellow creature later, though anyone who's played the more recent Metroid games I'm sure will recognize it for what it is. There's also a gallery of special images titled Chozo Memories, available once the game is complete. Whenever you collect 100% of the items in an area of the map, a new image in this gallery becomes available, allowing the players to see the story of the civilization that once controlled the planet, and parting the curtains on some of the oldest mysteries in the franchise. We'll go through each of these images in order, so we can better explain the entire story of the planet, as well as the history and purpose of the Metroids. Sometime in the past, a group of Chozo landed on the surface of the planet. These Chozo were scientists, exploring an uncharted world with wholly unique qualities. They began to collect and research Aeon, using a special device to siphon it from the carcass of a Hornode which had been killed by predators. In the third image, we see the creation of many robots that Samus had seen during her excursion on SR388, including the Diggernaut. These were mainly mining robots, created by the Chozo while they were researching Aeon, allowing them to continue digging deeper towards the planet's core as golden light shines upon them. However, this light was in fact a portent that the Chozo, in meddling with the environment, would soon be digging too deep. Come the next image, indeed, things have gone horrifically wrong. The Chozo's digging had unleashed some kind of yellow abomination that had begun consuming the local wildlife, which was apparently contained deep within the planet's crust. While I say consume, these parasites don't just eat the wildlife. Instead, they became infested and controlled by the creatures, serving as puppets for the malevolent parasites until their life force had been completely consumed. The Chozo knew they needed to find a way to combat this new threat, and to do so quickly. So they created a creature capable of consuming the parasites. The creatures they created for this purpose were actually the Metroids. This is where those creatures, the ones that the franchise is named after, come from. They were tools created for the express purpose of eradicating these horrific yellow creatures and halting their further spread throughout the universe. Their creation was the purpose of the mysterious lab from Area 7, and indeed the Metroids did their job well. When unleashed upon creatures infected by parasites, the Metroids were able to extract and then consume the parasites from their hosts, or simply consume those without hosts. Over time, almost all the parasites were killed, and once again the Chozo felt safe in their caverns. However, excessive Aeon eventually began to affect the Metroids, and the power of this life force caused them to grow into the different versions we fought throughout the game. Interestingly, they weren't designed by the Chozo to evolve like this. But being around so much life force, it should be no surprise that life, finds a way. The Metroids then, for mysterious unknown reasons, became violent, attacking the Chozo and quickly overwhelming them. Realizing the monsters they created, the Chozo began to leave the planet, sealing up the caves behind them. They created the Chozo Seals and filled the planet with a corrosive purple liquid in an attempt to keep the Metroids down below from escaping to the surface. As we know, however, the Metroids would simply burrow around the seals, making a tunnel towards the surface and allowing larval Metroids to escape and inhabit the surface of the planet, where they would eventually be discovered by the Federation. With the planet locked down, the remaining Chozo reached the surface, where they had discussion with another group of Chozo. However, when all finally seemed well, the SR-388 Chozo found themselves suddenly betrayed, as this second group slaughtered the researchers. These are clearly very different from the Chozo we followed thus far. More violent, more militaristic. Their leader stood above the corpses of the SR-388 Chozo, his weapons smoking, the scene now soaked with their blood, commanding his followers towards their next task. This moment was also a huge one for the Metroid fanbase. For many years before Samus Returns released, since the very start in 1986, it had been assumed that either the Metroids or the yellow parasites had caused the extinction of SR-388. When in reality, all this time, it had been the Chozo themselves who gunned down their own kind. And it's with this view of the Chozo, not just as researchers, but also as violent conquerors, we close out on Samus Returns. While we've only talked about the remake thus far, it would be a disservice to the series to not at least mention how much has changed from the original Return of Samus. The remake completely overhauled the story, both in terms of environments, such as changing the outer nest caves into the Chozo lab, and lore, like adding the previously discussed backstory of the SR-388 Chozo. The game itself was also restructured. Although Samus Returns didn't add any outright new areas like Zero Mission did, every area is heavily expanded in terms of scope and content. For example, the entire area where the Diggernaut is fought equates to just a single hallway in the original. The purple liquid so notable in this game was completely absent in the original, as new areas were instead blocked by standard lava, and opened up due to earthquakes caused by the Queen Metroid's rage at losing her children. It also adds a more sour note to the game, as while genociding the Metroids was portrayed as a straight-up heroic action in the original Game Boy game, the context of games that released after Metroid 2, most notably starting with Fusion, forced this game to take on a very different, much bleaker tone, in order to be more consistent with later games. Many Metroids try to flee and avoid fighting altogether. In general, the game wants you to question if you're doing the right thing in a way the original did not, and the ending foreshadows the tragedy we know is set to follow. rather than being a heroic send-off like the original. There's also generally many different retcons in this game that fix issues with later canon, such as introducing the Metroid's weakness to the Ice Beam, making Samus Returns consistent with the rest of the series. It also changed the motivation behind a lot of events in the game. While the Metroids were initially vaguely implied to have been created as a renewable source of energy, it was explicitly changed to a response to the parasites after Fusion released. The Metroids, rather than being inherently violent creatures that will threaten the entire galaxy as the original game says, are constantly implied throughout this title to be more or less content to mind their own business if left alone. The parasites introduced in Fusion feature prominently in the Chozo memories of this game, making the motivation of events in this title consistent with Fusion and the games released after it. The most notable addition to this title is the addition of Ridley, as he appears in the Prime series as the final boss. Aside from the Prime Trilogy callbacks this fight has, it also foreshadows the next 3 games of the timeline, and helps to explain Ridley's actions at the start of Super Metroid, as well as how he became his original organic self again before that game. It essentially bridges the gap between the 3D and 2D Metroid games. This is only the second Metroid game we've discussed, so I won't go too heavily into the timeline, but Samus Returns takes place around 2 years after the events of Zero Mission, though more games will be fit in between the two later on. Next time in Metroid, we go for what is considered to be the single most classic and important game in the franchise, Super Metroid. But that'll be some time away. In the more immediate future, we are returning to the world of Hyrule, one of the most important and iconic games in that series, with The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. And with that, I'll leave you folks be. Thanks for watching, and I'll see all of you next time.